Okay, our speaker today, we've tried to get a good variety of businesses. Today's speaker has a really unique story. I'm not going to tell her journey for you, but I'll tell you a little bit about her. She loves the outdoors. She's probably the first, maybe the second person I've met, first female I've met that's actually completed an Ironman event and completed it all the way through. So that's pretty amazing. She was born down in St. George. She lives now in Provo. Has one child and got her master's of public health at BYU, and founded this company just a little while ago, doing some fabulous stuff. It's all yours.
Okay.
Thanks, Melissa.
All right. Thank you. I was just telling him, I just had a child 4 months ago in December. Actually, before, when we were talking about coming into this class, I was like, maybe, I don't know. But I thought that having pregnancy and having a child was harder than an Ironman. So, in front of you women out there, just to let you know what's coming. But who's familiar with social entrepreneurship, what that means? Have you guys kind of heard that term? You could probably kind of draw what that might be. It doesn't have to do with social media. But anybody want to take a stab at what social entrepreneurship might mean, opposed to just straight up entrepreneurship?
Pursuing entrepreneurship endeavor that makes an impact on the society around you? Or
Absolutely.
is that it?
You got it. Yeah. So I think that traditionally people probably have thought, and you may think like, ooh, I want to work in social impact. I want to work in a sector that's doing good. So therefore I have to work in nonprofit or I have to work for the government. And that's actually not true. There are kind of a wide variety, a whole spectrum of ways that you can work. And I'm going to hopefully display today that I think, I probably just hit my microphone hard, that through harnessing the market for social good, there's a huge opportunity for impact. So, but the journey has been quite a journey. So I'm going to take you through that. I want to, this was supposed to go the other way. I wanted you to tell me, what does ambiguity mean? But I like some of these aspects of ambiguity, the quality of being open to more than one interpretation in exactness. Synonyms are vagueness, obscurity, uncertainty. How does the word ambiguity make you feel? And how many of you feel that right now as you are thinking about your future? Okay, I'm seeing some head nods. Yeah, I actually, Caesar, where are you? Was in this class, I think. He's not in this class. He'd come and ask me just before class, he said, what is the most important characteristic of an entrepreneur? And I said, being okay with ambiguity. And I really believe that if you're a person that needs surety in your path, entrepreneurship is going to be rough for you, because I don't know any entrepreneur that their end destination was what they had originally envisioned, and sometimes it's way different than what they envisioned originally. So that's just something to sit with and think about. So I assumed that my path to getting to the social impact that I wanted to make would be kind of this linear point A to point B. But what it looked like more was like this. and a lot of times I felt like in the crayon mode of life. It's been quite a journey, and I'm going to take you through some of the steps of that. So my undergrad was in special education, and I was a special ed teacher in right next door in Provo, and I have so many stories with that in itself. But while I was teaching special ed, and I'll just tell you some of these, I'll connect some of the dots here for you. But as I was teaching, I had a few kids in my own class, or those that I had taught in my internships and everything, that had that had been adopted internationally, and they were in my severe disabilities class. And as I got to know them and kind of figure out their stories, a few of these kids, I came to see that they were born with very physical disabilities that have very little correlation to mental disabilities, which is the reason that they were in my class. And so as I started thinking through that, like how did this happen? I came to, and I started reading up about orphanage situations and what effects that can have on children long term, and seeing that some of these kids had actually gained disabilities either through neglect or abuse in some of these really hard situations in their home countries. And so with that, I thought, can we prevent this? And I started thinking about prevention, and I don't know if we have any public health majors here, but the field of public health is prevention of, a lot of times it's, we've learned about it through COVID. It's prevention of the spread of disease. But even, this is kind of a fringe part of it, but prevention of disease by those, prevention of disability by those that did not start out like that. And so I actually ended up doing a master's in public health. And part of that, I was able to go and work in an orphanage on a health program for kids with disabilities. And that was a really great experience. And through that, I then really got to know the field of global health, and like looking globally at what's happening around the world and those that don't have access to health and how that impacts whole societies. And so I just got really excited about that. And just after graduating, I was really lucky to land a job that took me to Uganda. And so I think I graduated and like 2 days later got on an airplane to Uganda. So was just kind of like bright-eyed and like, here goes nothing. And while I was in Uganda, I got to know many of the women in the local community. And one woman, her name is Eve, a little bit about her. She was a single mother. She engaged in just sporadic pickup work. She didn't have a consistent job, but each day it was like finding what she could do that day so that she could pay for the ingredients to make the one meal she would feed her children that night. Her children, therefore, were in poor health. She didn't have money for school fees to send her kids to school, so they were not in school at the time, and she was living in her pastor's garage. And unfortunately, this is not an atypical situation for a woman in a developing community. And one thing that really, like kind of a moment that made me really think about the problem that I've now been able to, that I've been working on solving for the last decade, was one of the projects that we were doing was teaching, we were working with some community health workers, teaching classes about disease prevention, and doing that through hand washing with soap. That was like one of the classes we were teaching. And we had taught this class a few different times in different villages, and after a few times, as we were talking with people, came to realize that many of the people we were teaching actually couldn't afford soap. And that was this like, what are we even doing here? We came with a solution without knowing the true context of what's happening in this community. And so that made us sit back and think, people need jobs. That we got to work on that. And then people can start buying soap, and people can go to the hospital when they need it, and these other, the correlations with economic stability and health. And so, and particularly we got to know as I talked about Eve's situation, that so many women carried the economic burden for the family, but there was very little work for women. And so that just led to generational poverty. And so we decided to focus on how we could empower women in the local community through jobs. And people ask me why we chose jewelry, and I don't have a great answer. And I didn't take any entrepreneurship classes when I was a student. And so you're ahead of the game in thinking about a business model. We just really liked the jewelry that we'd seen in the local community. And so we said, okay, we'll have will train and employ women to make jewelry that will sell in the US, and the proceeds will return back to support them and their families. And so this is kind of our model of how that would work. In the beginning, we thought as women were in our program for a couple of years, they would be able to kind of get stable and be able to then launch their own businesses and leave room in the program for other women to come through. And that was our original model. And that was assuming that everybody is an entrepreneur. And that's not a true assumption. And so we saw that when they had come and had stable employment for the first time, leaving that after 2 years became very difficult. And so we've changed our model since that time. This is an organization, so it's called Musana, which means sunlight in the local language. And a little story that happened it was the end of 2011. So we started in 2009, so we were a couple of years in. And we had an online shop where we sold the jewelry and told the stories of the artisans. And we had made our biggest sales of the year during Christmas as people were buying gifts and everything. And we were so excited because leading up to that for 2 years as we ran this, and it was kind of a side thing while myself and the other two co-founders had jobs. And each month we'd get to the end of the month and be like, okay, it's time to pay the artisans, and we have not sold enough jewelry. So who's got a few $100? And that went on for the first couple of years. Well, we were so excited that we had made enough money that was going to sustain us for a few months with our Christmas sales. Well, our accountant in Uganda, and I actually do not blame him for what happened. We had not put safeguards in place, and here we were entrusting people with money that it was more than they had ever seen, some of them. And he actually got hold of our credit card or our debit card and drained our entire bank account. And we were just like, it had been rough anyways, and here we'd finally made money and it was gone. And we were like, okay, we gave it a good shot. We probably should we should close this up. I don't know that we're doing as the good that we want to do. And kind of in a very lucky situation, I was working for a nonprofit that needed someone to go over to Uganda for a project. And what's funny is just to make sure you know that not everything is just handed to you. I was going to go to Uganda for a month for the nonprofit I was working for, and just before I left, they're like, and by the way, your job won't be here when you get back. And I was like, oh, okay. So I went to Uganda, and I was there and doing the project for them, but I was like, I'm gonna check on our group and most likely close it down. And while I was there, I saw Eve, the woman that I talked about originally, was one of our artisans, and when I knew her in 2009, she was shy. She would hardly look you in the eye. She didn't speak any English. She would come and wash clothes for our group by hand, and she was part of our original 7 women in the program. And coming back 2 years later, she was this bright, just force to be reckoned with. They call her the Mulalu, which means the crazy one. And she is the class clown. And she's still with us today. And as I saw the change, and it's not that she had changed, it was that she had been under the heavy weight of poverty. And when this was lifted and she had the dignity of work, I don't know, I'm emotional because I've told the story a lot of times before, but when she was able to provide for her family and have that confidence, she's this person. If you walk into our workshop in Uganda now, she'll be the first one to jump on her feet and sing, "We are happy to receive you, welcome." And she'll sing and dance. She's so fun. And I thought, there's something to this that we need. There's something here. And so I was like, I don't have a job to go back to. And I was planning on breaking up with my boyfriend before I left to Uganda, but I didn't have time. You know how that goes? And so it was just too crazy. And so I was like, well, I changed my flight for 8 months out. I called him and I was like, hey, I'm actually not coming home. So, and he was like, yeah, and it was like the easiest breakup. So if you need to get out of something, go to Uganda. And like I was living in Provo. My parents had to drive from St. George and like move me out of my apartment. I had like left it a mess. But I stayed and we really got this program going. So we started with 7 artisans in 2009. And by 2016, we had 20 full-time and 40 part-time artisans supporting over 250 children. And this was really exciting, to this growth that happened over those years. So this started as a side hustle. This became my full-time gig. And however, our Uganda program was thriving, but our US program, we could not pay ourselves. And when I say ourselves, that's generous. That was me and a bunch of volunteers that were getting like internship experience. And so, like people would see this on social media and were like, your life is so cool. And the reality was that I was doing so many side hustles just to pay for groceries. That include, I was doing at-home therapy for kids with disabilities. I did teach adjunct here during that time here at UVU. So I was teaching an intro to health class. I was teaching dance lessons. I was doing, and this was the most embarrassing one, because I was in my late 20s with a master's degree, and I was donating, but not donating anything. I was selling my plasma, selling my body to pay for groceries. I was running dogs for money. And there was one point that I actually like sold my beloved sewing machine to my parents. And they know, they watched me present about this one time and they're like, we didn't know. And I was like, I know, I just didn't want to tell you that I sold it to you because I needed to buy groceries. So it was not working. It was working, but it wasn't working in a sustainable way. And a lot of times in social impact, we talk about sustainability and think about sustainability meaning like that this is a program that is like really working for the people you're trying to work with. Well, sustainability also means for those that are running it, like we have to eat too. And so there came a point, and I remember a colleague I was talking with, a colleague that works here at UVU that is incredible. And we were sitting down for dinner and she just was like, Melissa, this is not working. And I just bawled and I was like, I know it's not, you're right. So we either had to shut it down or think differently. And so we started thinking, I'd got to know the artisan sector really well. And I actually had come and gone to Uganda several times. And kind of understood both the opportunities and the plight of the people in the sector. So artisan craft is actually the second largest employer of people in the developing world. Would you have guessed that? Second only to agriculture. So we're talking about, we're talking about like hundreds of millions of people who are engaging in handcraft. So any of you that have traveled to a place with indigenous craft, it's beautiful, high quality, highly skilled indigenous craft. However, many of these, it's very common for these groups to lack market access. Even many of them rely on the tourism industry, and when that's down, their work is obliterated. They are sorely underpaid by middlemen, so very often the value add all goes to the person that's exporting it, not to the person who made it. And very often they become indebted in these cycles of being indebted for their raw material and never get ahead. So as we got to know these two things, regarding the artisan sector, we started thinking about, okay, what is an opportunity that exists here? So a market problem is that companies have this both internal and external desire to do good. And one reason, one big driving force for companies to want to engage in social good is you. They want to attract you to be their employees because your generation is saying, I don't want to just go to a company that's just about money. I want to work at a company that's doing good in the world, and I care about that. And studies show that people are willing to take even a pay cut to work for a company that they feel good about. And so, however, very often these companies may not have an expertise in that area. And so they may be doing like random projects that aren't really making good impact or just kind of pet projects. So we thought about if we could connect these two sectors, artisans with conscious companies, we might be onto something. So this is the idea behind Ethic. And this is where conscious companies and artisan cooperatives connect. So how we work is our main value add is that we are making it accessible for companies to source high quality handmade goods at scale. And so there's a lot of like online marketplaces where you can buy artisan goods. You can't actually buy one item at a time from us. We only sell in bulk, and we sell to companies. We do that, where we really have been able to, what has made us sustainable is we will create a product for a company that they launch. And very often when they're buying that, they will buy 10,000 plus items. And that then gives, sometimes we have 1,000 artisans across several villages working on a project for several months. So they're getting consistent work on this order. And, but that's not, that's kind of a narrower sector to find companies that have products and that could incorporate a handmade product into their product lineup. And so we've developed a second selling channel, and that is through doing ethical corporate gifts for companies. And in addition to giving them the product, we also do a lot of storytelling. So we interview our artisans, we gather impact data about how many artisans worked on the project, how many family members they are supporting, how many fair pay work hours and work days, and then we give all these assets to the company so they can use that for their social media, and they can talk about we just white label. And that means we don't put our logo on anything. We very often brand it for the company, and then they're able to own the impact. And so we make them the hero, and we're just the ninjas in the background making everything happen. So I want to tell you about a project, and you remember our program in Uganda. We now work with about 40 artisan groups around the world. So from ceramic stoneware in Vietnam, woven baskets in Rwanda, leather goods in Guatemala. So we do a variety of items. But this is back to our group in Uganda where we started. And this is the biggest order we've ever done. This was a company that wanted us to create handmade ornaments for Christmas. And they ordered 160,000 handmade ornaments. And if you would imagine it, I think these ornaments in their little boxes stacked up may fill this room. Like that, like just to give you an idea of like what that looked like. So we had 752 women employed on this project, and this is in the middle of lockdowns. So this actually is not at our workshop in Uganda. This is in a school, because we had to rent a few schools, which they were out of session because of COVID. And so we could do social distancing and have like a morning and an evening shift so we could have more women working on it, but then also be able to care for their kids. And 3,000 dependents supported and 26,000 fair pay work days on this order. So going from our early beginnings to this, I just want to remind everybody that very often you see like the unicorn companies and think that they're like an overnight success. I started this company 2 years ago, but have been like trying to crack this nut for almost 13 years. And so that's a reality of when you're really trying to solve a problem. It takes a long time to get there. So it was like this. Remember that this is what the journey has actually been, rather than people are now getting to know us and seeing the end result. This is our impact numbers from just the past 2 years. 2,600 artisans, over 10,000 family members supported, 108,000 fair pay work days, and over 500,000 handmade products made. So it has been a journey, but I never would have imagined that this is where we'd be at in 2009 when I was like, women can't afford soap. That's what I started with. And just one story to wrap this up, and then I'd love to hear your questions. This was a few years ago, and I was in Uganda and took these pictures. These were some new women that were coming on, a new cohort of artisans. And many of them, this was going to be their first real payday. Again, most of them came from working in the informal economy. They were just doing like little pickup work, whatever job they could find that day. And so they'd been working for 2 weeks. So we had cash inside of envelopes that we'd hand to them with their name on it. And as we started handing these out, they just started cheering, and like the atmosphere was just so fun, hooping and hollering. And they started chanting something together in the local language. And I turned to one of the artisans that spoke really good English, and I said, what are they saying? What is this like chant that they're doing? And I think that this really encapsulates why the artisans that we work with around the world do what they do, and why we do what we do at Ethic. They said, today our children will drink milk. And that's what gets me up every day. And so we're Ethic Collective. Follow us on social media. Our social media is not very promotion-y. It's very much storytelling. We love talking about the lives of the people behind our work. So we'd love to have you follow us and follow our journey as we keep figuring out where we're going. So that's my story. If you want to see this, some of our items, this is our current way that we're trying to get into new companies for their gifting. Is we send them this package that has a stoneware mug from Vietnam, brewing cacao from Ecuador, and a cashmere scarf made by people with disabilities in Nepal. We send that to them. It has a card that has a picture of artisans from each group, tells the story, and then on the other side, it's like, you can put your logo here. Like this could be you. So that's one method that we've done. We've been sending these out to key people that we try to find in different companies to say, you can gift better, because if any of you are in the corporate world where they'll gift you, people have like dozens of tumblers and t-shirts and are sick of swag, and that all ends up in landfills, and we can do something more ethical and interesting. Yeah, tell me your questions.
So does your product go straight from the artisan source to the customer, or does it stop here, or stop the warehouse?
Great question. So with our large orders, when we're doing these huge ones, it will go directly to the warehouse of the receiving company, the customer. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that means many of these groups have never been engaged in printing, because we'll print a card that talks about the artisans, and then also has the company's logo on it. And so we've been able to kind of build capacity there that they can now package things, because it has to be ready to go for the customer. Yeah. But then the smaller orders do come through our Provo office. We're just in the startup building, if anybody ever goes there.
So this Ethic Collective has been going on for 2 years?
Yeah, we just started at the beginning of 2020.
So I'm curious how you did the networking, because it's hard to get a hold of international artisans in very different places, and then also in the business world. So how did you manage both of those networking challenges?
Very good question. Such a key question is networking. I think that one of our challenges in the beginning was I was young and didn't have connections. We would do big fundraising galas and not make very much money because we didn't have connections. So it's being in the space for a long time has helped. But how we get our artisan groups and actually, let me just tell you a little bit about what COVID did to our business model. So we started at the beginning of 2020. COVID hit, and we were like, oh, we're gonna have to push pause on this. But then we randomly started getting these huge orders with companies that were growing a lot through COVID and wanted to show that they cared about the world through products. And so that was all through a personal connection into this big company. But in how we were doing this before is that for big orders, we'd go in country. I'd have to travel there and make sure all the logistics were right and that it was going to get on the boat at the right time and everything. And COVID happens, we have big orders, and we can't travel. And it was the best thing for us because we learned to lean on our artists and partners, and they did great. They did great without us. Come to find out, they know their craft. They know, like, they have better connections in country. And it was silly that it took that for us to realize that. But because of that, we kind of iterated to say, hey, we're a platform that we can like showcase artists and groups. And that's what we, like, if we were having to travel to each one, that would really hamper our ability to grow. But as a platform where we have owned that we on the US side, the best thing we can do is market their goods and make the connections and then let them do their magic. And we're the connecting piece. And so yeah, we now view ourselves as like somewhat a tech company, that we're a platform that is making this connection. We just do a lot of behind the scenes logistics to make that happen. But then, yeah, how we get into companies, we are right now in the process of hiring a marketing person. We've never really spent money on marketing. So this will be our new, just a new horizon to really get the word out about what we're doing. Yeah.
So I know you talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious, with the setback, what things you did to propel yourself forward into this? Because like obviously when you had no money to do anything with it, that could be pretty just like disheartening, I would feel like. So
Yeah.
what did you do to overcome that?
I don't know really, because I've had people say like, what was it that helped you to just like keep hacking at it? And I was like, I don't know if that's like perseverance or if it's just dumb. You know, and there were times that I felt really like foolish for like, I've been hacking at this for years. And you get into this like sinking ship thing where you're like, I've already been in it so many years, like we're like the next thing's gonna work. And it really took a breaking point to rethink the vision. And it was kind of like a last ditch effort, like, okay, maybe we can connect in with companies and like totally shift our business model. And so sometimes it does take those like, you know, rock bottom moments where you're like, something has to change because this is not working. So yeah, I don't know like why I stuck in it for so many years, because it was rough times. Oh yeah.
That's not uncommon. I mean, throughout your life, you're going to run into these situations where you're saying, wow, I'm struggling to make this work. And that is a hard decision to say, at what point do I pull the plug and pivot?
Yeah. Yeah.
As opposed to, do I stick with it?
Yeah.
You know, good luck with those decisions. They're hard ones, but obviously a great example of getting to that point of something's got to change and being able to make that happen.
Are there any things that you guys would recommend for reassessing, or like what things you would look at to reassess in that situation, or you just like kind of grit and just go for it?
Well, in the beginning, I can say like if I would have taken a class and like even had the perspective of how to think about a business and how to think about like fail fast, fail often. Because in the beginning, we were just kind of like kept trying the same things for a lot of years that just kept not working. And actually I would go to different like community trainings with the like small business center. They had trainings on entrepreneurship, and it helped me think in new ways. And this idea of like, okay, this is not working, let's iterate. And that's, if I would have known that from the beginning, I think it wouldn't have been such a long journey. Yeah.
And that's the whole thing about ambiguity.
Yeah.
Is you don't know. So if it's not working, try something a little different.
Yeah.
And you just got to keep plugging away.
Yeah. Yeah, back here and then back here.
How do you determine the fair pay for these developing?
Great question. So who's heard of like fair trade coffee, fair trade chocolate, right? We hear that. That's like a common thing now. It's come into the mainstream. As we were looking into how to, in the beginning, we worked so closely. We were in country with the artisans. So one just quick story. What time do we go tell?
You got another 12 minutes.
Okay. So in the beginning, one of our first projects outside of Uganda was in Rwanda. We were working with basket weavers. And while we were in country, so it was an order of 30,000 baskets. These small baskets, they were very like a typical traditional style of basket. And we knew how long they would take to make, so they took 4 days to make. And we knew how much materials cost. And then we had talked with a lot of people to understand what's a livable wage here? What is a wage that you need so that you can pay for your kids to go to school, so you can provide 3 meals a day, so that you can have some savings? Like, what is that? And that's a tricky thing because it's very regional. Like, even the difference between the capital city and a rural place in a country can be like starkly different. So we were doing that more like when we were there. And but when we had like kind of calculated what would be a fair wage for artisans to make that basket. And then we were meeting with a group, and we gave them we had a spec sheet of like everything we needed for this order, and they said, okay, yeah, we typically charge this much. And we were like, that's too low. And I remember they just started giggling. And it was like so funny because they were like, you don't barter up? Like, what? And it was this, they had been, like, they'd had to sell them for super cheap to like make them, but they were not making a fair wage. And so that's what we're dedicated to. Now we are plugging in, and now as we scale, we have to have more of a systematic approach. And one way that we could do that is say an artisan group that we work with has to be fair trade certified, and like kind of outsource it to fair trade. Well, as we looked into the fair trade sector, we came to see that, and we actually, our head of impact just wrote an article that we're trying to get into the New York Times, and there's a very little chance that we'll get in. But it's World Fair Trade Day is next week, or I think in 2 weeks, and she wrote an article about how fair trade sometimes excludes the very poor, the poorest of the poor, because small groups, like to get fair trade certified, it's really expensive. And for example, for a small farm, they can't get fair trade certified, but if they sell out to a larger farm that has a fair trade certification, it works. But that it doesn't seem to affect the actual growers and pickers of the thing. So we looked at that and said, this isn't working. How can we verify that these groups are paying fair pay? And so we have, we're in the process of developing, and right now we're piloting our first iteration of a vetting tool where we will have, the mentality behind it is that if we have this huge barrier, like become fair trade certified, there's so many that will never make it over that. And so just will never be able to access markets because they can't get that. So if we could make a stepped approach where they can like start with reporting. And so we have, right now our first step is they report, we have an 80-question tool that we've created that is like reporting on how they verify the age of their workers so they're not employing children, how they, when they're sourcing anything that's organic, that's grown, that it's not degrading the earth, and how they, or what sustainability principles are behind any of the wood they're using. And then they have, the very last section is, there's a tool out there that is like a fair wage calculator, and it's super confusing. And we've had some of our artisans use it, and that's used in the fair trade world. And they're like, we don't really get it, but yeah, we passed. And we're like, okay, this isn't working. So we have them justify how, we have a list of things that their artisans should be able to buy. And so that is like their kids are in school, some of the things that I mentioned before, they're eating 3 meals a day, et cetera. And they have to justify how they are, how their wages are fair pay to their artisans. So that's just them reporting. Our next step will then be verifying that. And so we'll have in-country people that we can hire to verify that. But it's really important to us, and it's super hard to get to know, but we're hacking at it. But great question. Thank you for asking that. When we get to a really definitive answer, I'll share it with you, but now we're in the process.
Any idea roughly how much would an artisan make in a fair day?
It varies so much. I mean, now the poverty, like extreme poverty is like what is it now? $1.50, $2. But like we have some artisans I know that are making like no, that's not even $8 a day. That's $8 an hour in one country that we're working in. So anyways, it varies. I know like some of them are making more like $10+ a day. So also what's challenging is that many of them do it part-time, or they're like working a few hours a day and then they're caring for their kids. So it is such a complicated process we're trying to figure out, but we're gonna get there, and we're gonna keep iterating on that. Yeah, great question. There was another question back, I think. Oh, perfect. Okay, well, I gave you a long, not definitive answer yet, but yes. Oh, yes.
With introducing all this money to like these small communities and economies, have you been able to like see a difference of like the, I guess, structure and stuff like that built up in these communities?
Okay, great question. So we, so often in the nonprofit sector, it's very difficult to get to know your impact, like your true impact. You can have nice stories to tell. And for the past decade, and I actually, one time I was applying for a grant when we were a nonprofit, and they asked about what like data we had. And and we'd done more like student groups had come and like done impact evaluations. And I didn't trust any of them, because I know that especially when Westerners are in a community and trying to get like data, it's not gonna be accurate. It's not gonna be, and there's reasons that an artisan would over or under report depending on what they're thinking like you want to hear. And so anyways, I remember this funder called me and said, hey, you kind of vaguely talked about some of your impact. And I was like, yeah, to be honest, we don't really truly know at this point. We've tried to do impact evaluation. I could tell you stories of when they've failed, like how we've got to know why they don't work, or why they hadn't worked. And they said, and then later they granted us $50,000, and it was the biggest grant we've ever got. And they were like, thank you for your transparency. And I was like, oh, wow, transparency. But we, in 2020, we worked with a team of third-party evaluators to do a randomized control trial. So you hear about randomized control trials in like scientific studies, but they can be applied to social impact as well. And that's what this group particularly specializes in. It's a group of professors that are really legit, and they've done studies for the Gates Foundation and everything. So we worked with them, and how this worked, if you want to hear some of the details, it's kind of fun. This was actually correlated with the 160,000 piece order that we had. So we had to ramp up our operations and bring on women that had never been in our artisan network before. And so therefore we could start with a baseline of people that had never worked with us. And so there was an economic survey that they would take to just know about, and the impact group that did it, they knew that very often having people report about their income is not the most accurate, but if you have them report on their expenditures, it's much more accurate. So it's asking them how much they spend on food a month, how much they spend on rent, and all this to get to know where they're at economically. So we had a list of 800 women that could potentially be part of this order that we did, and they were all surveyed by Ugandan surveyors that would call them on the phone and say, and it wasn't connected to us or artisan craft or anything. They would just say, hey, we want to do this survey with you. If you complete it, then at the end we'll send you 1,000 shillings in mobile money. And so they would answer those questions, and then half of them were selected to, and it ended up being about 300 of them were selected to participate in the order. And then in six months later, they did a follow-up phone call and just asked them the economic questions again. What we found, and what was interesting, we had all of them were able to work for 3 months, and then we didn't have as much work for the second 3 months, and so we only had about 90 working the second 3 months. So 90 had the full 6 months of work, and so we were able to have even more of a comparison of those that did not get the contract, those that had 3 months, and those that had 6 months. And I know, I'll tell you this in advance, that when you're like dealing with humans and you're like, they didn't get the treatment, that doesn't feel ethical. We did then the next big order, we had those that didn't make the study group be able to work on that one. But so what we found is that those that had worked for 3 months with us were typically making 3 times what they were making before. So that was cool. We were like, okay, that's exciting. But when we looked at markers of like increase in assets that are like markers of really coming out of poverty, or like assets that would help you be able to get a bank account, there was like very little change in what they owned after 3 months of work. However, those that had 6 months of work, there was a statistical significance, and the researchers, and they like nerd out on this kind of like data in like developing economies. And there was a statistical significance of women being able to purchase a cow, and then other assets like bicycle, stove, refrigerator. And these are things that are like our wealth building assets that like mean something. So we were actually able to see a difference in 6 months. And so that's really led us to say, we need to work really hard on growing our artisan network as fast as we grow our customer network, so that they can have consistent work. So we don't, if one grows faster than the other, then if we have like a ton of orders but not enough artisans, that's a problem. If we have a ton of artisans but few orders, they're just getting orders here and there, and it's not making a real difference. And so we're really trying to have that kind of balance that we're working on. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think some great examples here of the 4 big questions. What's the problem? Were there problems she was working on? Yes, in several areas. Identified who has the problems, the level